Oh, hi Ella. How are you doing today?
Hi Cynthia, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. Nice to see you again after seeing you this morning.
Yeah. It's a good meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so can you introduce yourself?
Okay, so hi, I'm Ella. I'm a first year trainee clinical scientist in clinical engineering.
And what about your pre-STP background?
So previously I left university and I did some work, but for my degree I did a bachelor's degree in bioengineering at the University of Sheffield. And then after that, I worked in a school as a teaching assistant. And then after that, I went on to be a lab technician for a company that provided lab support to AstraZeneca. And now I'm here doing the STP.
Yeah, okay. So what NHS trust are you training at?
Nottingham. Nottingham,
Yeah,
yes.
that's very weird to ask because, of course, I know we're both in the same trust, but
Yeah.
I just felt I should ask that for the benefit of those listening. And for the university part, what university do you go to?
King's College London.
Yeah. Okay. So, can you tell us about your STP application experience?
So I came across the STP sort of the summer between my second and third year at university. My tutor at university, she'd mentioned doing scientist training with the NHS many, many years ago. And I sort of Googled it. I was like, oh, what is this? And I came across the scientist training program. And then I found out that it was in clinical engineering. I thought, well, this is great. I wanted to work for the NHS and do something with engineering. So it seemed like the best career for me. And I thought about applying in the January of my third year, but I decided I wanted to focus on my degree as it's as many applicants know, quite a lengthy process. I just wanted to focus on my degree, get that out of the way. I also wanted to have some more experience before applying so that I had the best chance possible, really.
Okay, so I know you mentioned that you worked as a teaching assistant, then you worked as a lab support to AstraZeneca. So, with those experience, how did you tailor it to your application? Would you say the transferable skills you got helped, or would you say the work experience you got played a major role during your application? That's for the supporting information.
I think they did really help. Especially working as a teaching assistant, I worked with children with special educational needs. So this really helped develop my personal skills and especially communication and teamwork and working with others. Definitely transferable skills for the NHS. But yeah, that really helped answer those sort of person specification points on the application process. And then working in the lab, I actually applied to that job after I applied to the STP because I wasn't sure if I was going to get the STP or not. And I got the lab job, and then a couple of months later, I found out I got the STP. But I'd still been working at that job for around a month and a half by the time I had the interview, and just being able to show that I'd made those skills working in school, and then I transferred them to this new workplace already. I can then obviously do that again when working for the NHS.
Okay. Then what about your STP interview? What was your experience on that and how did you prepare for the STP interview?
I think my interview went okay. There were definitely questions that I did stumble across, but the interviewers want you to do well. You know, they want to give the job to someone and they want the person they're interviewing to do well. I mean, my interviews were lovely. I was actually interviewed by Nottingham, who were my first choice, so I was very lucky in that regard. And yeah, they were just really lovely. And just take your time with the questions. If you need a little pause to think before you answer, my best tip: have a glass of water next to you. Have a drink of water when you're thinking of the answer. That really helps. Just gives you a second to gather your thoughts before you just answer. And I think I had about a month before when I found out I got the interview to when I had the interview. So I had quite a long time to prepare. It gave me time to contact the trust as well, contact the clinical engineering department at Nottingham, which I definitely recommend doing. They obviously couldn't tell me anything about the interview, but they were able to tell me more about the department. They also gave me the contact details for their third year trainee. So they were able to give me, I had a conversation with them on the phone. They were able to give me some advice and just talk more about what the STP is about, which these videos are definitely helpful for applicants as well. because I feel like there's not a huge amount online about what it's actually like when you're doing it. So these are great. And then in preparation, so yes, I contacted the trust and I also spent a lot of time practicing questions. My mum, she was very lovely. She spent a lot of time practicing with me. I think every night for a month we spoke on the phone and went through practice questions. She really, really helpful. She really wanted me to get the job. So yeah, very grateful to her. But that's one thing I also recommend is just, I know it can be a bit awkward or embarrassing doing it with other people, but practicing your answers, even if you don't know what the questions are going to be, go through the person's specification and just get someone to ask you questions based on them. So, tell me about a time where you showed good communication skills, things like that. Those sort of questions come up in interviews all the time. So, doing practice questions, it does really help because it just means the answers flow so much easier when you're in the interview.
Yeah, that's very correct. Then, talking about clinical engineering, of course, everyone knows that engineering have a lot to do with construction and other parts. But talking about clinical engineering, can you talk us through what you guys do and what your specialty is about?
So the Clinical Engineering STP, I find is quite broad. I'm only in my first year, so I can't talk about the whole experience just yet. But I love it. It's great. I get to see so many different things. It's very, very broad. I've spent quite a lot of time patient facing already, which you wouldn't really expect from a clinical engineer. But I'll get on to that in a minute. Basically, the main clinical engineering departments in hospitals, they do all the medical device management. So your classic BP machines you've got on wards, things like that. It's the clinical engineering department that will look after them. I'll maintain them. Any new devices that come into the trust, they all need to be acceptance tested to make sure they're working correctly. You can't just whack any equipment into a hospital. They've got a whole medical device applications team that work through any applications for medical devices that teams want to make sure that the devices they want suit the needs of the user. So they're not just getting a random device that might not work that well. Compare it to other devices that are on the market, things like that. Also making sure they comply to regulations. Obviously, there are a lot of regulations that medical devices need to be compliant with because some of these devices could be saving people's lives. So you need to make sure that they're like CE marked, things like that. Got a medical devices safety team that helps with that, and they keep in contact with the MHRA. So any safety alerts about medical devices, they're on it straight away. So very, very broad. And you've also got sort of at Nottingham, they do medical device innovation as well. So my deputy training officer, actually, he's a consultant clinical scientist. He, as part of his HSST, he developed a halo traction wheelchair for children. So just an example of medical device innovation. With normal halo devices, patients have to be laying in the bed all day and all night. So with this wheelchair, kids are able to leave the ward, that they're not laying in bed all day and night. As you can imagine with young patients, that's very, very mentally challenging as well. So it's just one example of how clinical engineering can innovate new medical devices that can really help benefit patients.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So, when you say you are already having some patient facing experience, is it when you get to the ward, or at what point do you get to see patients?
Yes, so as part of my first year rotations, I've been around to a couple of different hospitals. I've been to the Florence Nightingale Community Hospital in Derby, I've been to Kings Mill in Mansfield, and then City Hospital in Nottingham as well. Mainly the one in Mansfield. I was working in the medical device management group, and I went with technicians around the hospital, monitoring devices, doing planned maintenance on them, things like that. So I was able to go in a lot of different kinds of wards, a lot of different areas of the hospital, and that's not clinical based, as in doing patient appointments, but you are still around patients. So it's keeping those core NHS values the forefront of your mind, making sure that you're still respectful wherever you go, because on some of these wards, patients are very, very sick. So you may be there to do some maintenance on the devices surrounding them, but you're making sure you're doing it very respectfully. And then also, while I've been in Derby, I have done some observations from work in the gate lab. So the clinical scientist of the gate lab is actually a clinical engineer. So clinical engineers can be patient facing in clinical work. So in the gait lab, they put these little sticky markers on the legs that does 3D motion capture. So gait analysis, very, very cool. I really enjoyed that. That's an example of how clinical engineers can also be clinical work as well. Then you've got sort of rehabilitation engineering where clinical engineers can work. That's sort of making custom made wheelchairs for patients. And also when we were down in London for the university part of the STP, we had lectures from clinical scientists and clinical engineering that are in loads of different kinds of departments like urodynamics, gastroenterology. I was just amazed at how clinical engineers are not just dealing with medical devices in the basement of a hospital.
Yeah.
So clinical engineers doing the STP, clinical scientists, they can be patient facing as well because we have the engineering background to understand a lot of the data that's being collected in diagnostic tests and also the machines required to do these diagnostic tests. As an engineer, you sort of have the knowledge to fully understand how it works and how you're getting the data that is shown, which can really, really help analyze it.
Yeah. Okay, so typically, what is a day in your life like? Because I know you're a trainee right now, and our days can vary based on our rotations and all that. So, what's a typical week in your life like?
Very, very, very varied. I mean, because it's first year and I'm doing the first year rotations, I feel like I'm all over the place at the moment. It can be very tiring. It's a lot of work. You're going to new places every week and you're being like bombarded with information, which is great because I love learning so much, and that's why the SCP is so good. But at the end of the week, my brain can hurt a little bit from how much knowledge I'm
I
trying to cram in.
know.
My trusty notebook goes everywhere so I can write everything down. Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask questions because if you need someone to repeat something so you get it written down right, do it right the first time. But yeah, I can't really say what my day-to-day week is like. 1 minute. So last week I was with neurophysiology. I spent some time with vascular science. I've spent some time with Evoke Potentials, which is like specialist auditory and visual diagnostics. I spent a lot of time in medical physics. Yeah, I just go everywhere.
So now that you're in first year, what rotations do you do in your first year?
So we do introduction to clinical engineering, introduction to physiological measurement, introduction to medical physics, and introduction to clinical scientific computing.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Just okay.
you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around your specialty since because there are different sections. Yeah, you've said it's very broad and there are different areas of the hospital. Like when you mention neurophysiology, I'm sure their devices would be different from what they have in cardiac science and different from what they have in critical care, as well as the kidney transplant and those ones. So do you really have to know everything about every device used in the hospital, or would you specialize in a particular one, maybe in your second year or third year, or how would that work?
So the STP is about having sort of a basic understanding of how planned maintenance is done. You don't necessarily need to know how to do it on every single device. That's more of what a clinical technician does. They do the day-to-day maintenance within the clinical engineering department. The STP, you do observe and shadow and get to do some of the device maintenance, but the main part of the STP is looking at the management part and the role of a clinical scientist within this.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Specifically, then, yeah, I know you've talked about your specialty and you've talked about innovation, where you gave an example of one of your training officers. Specifically, if you're asked, what's the role of a clinical scientist in clinical engineering? So, what response would you give?
There are many different jobs you can do as a clinical scientist in clinical engineering. We've got clinical engineering as a department as a whole, and you've got little different teams within clinical engineering, and each one of them, I don't know if each one of them has a clinical scientist, but there's quite a few clinical scientists within the department dotted in these teams. Medical device applications, medical device governance, medical device innovation, medical device management, just to name a few. Yeah, their jobs are very varied. I haven't got quite round to working with each one yet because I've been doing the first year rotations. So maybe in my second or third year, I can come back for an interview and give more information.
Yeah, that's fine. That's very understandable. So I know that the STP is very intense. We'll have the unit parts, and then we'll have the rotations. We'll have our one file. We'll have the training activities. So how are you balancing the STP, the unit part, the work part, as well as your personal life?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. It's a lot to balance, as you know. It can be extremely hectic at times. The clinical engineering course in London changed this year so that the first year is all coursework based rather than having any exams, which can be less stressful because exams can be a lot. However, all the coursework was due before January. So we started the university in September. We did 2 months, to September to November. And then we had quite a few pieces of coursework due before January. But obviously, you go back to work when you finish university. So you're working full time and doing these courseworks. However, my training officers they were very supportive, and as part of the training program, you're allocated a day per week to work on your university work if you need to. Now that I've submitted all the coursework, I don't need it. My training officers are really supportive, and you have got to say to them, am I able to have an extra day to work on this so that I can get it all completed? And they're there to support you, so they should be fine with it. But it's knowing when to speak up and ask for help if you need it. So recently, because of my rotations have been very full on, I haven't had enough time to catch up on some of my write-ups for some of the training activities. So I just contacted one of my training officers and said, after this rotation, is it okay if I have like a consolidation week just to make sure that I have all the first year training activities and write-ups done out the way before starting any of the phase 2, phase 3 ones? And I thought it was a good idea just to make sure that I'm on top of things. And as I said, don't be afraid to ask for help or support when needed, because they're there to make sure that you're doing okay and that your training's going well. So
I think that's one thing I love about the STP. They are usually very supportive, and just like you said, for me, I just need to ask my training officer, and he's happy to support. So I also get 4 rotations in my first year. So after each rotation, I just like to get my training activities done. So I know like I'm done. I'm not coming back to this. So after each rotation, I can ask for some time, a week or so. And I'm like, yeah, if that helps, then after writing up, I'm then back to the department or maybe move on to my next rotation. So it's really good to hear from someone else that will kind of have the same type of support across different specialties of the STP. At least it makes it easier considering the level of work we have to do as trainees. That's really good. Okay, so now that you're a trainee, what skills and qualities do you think people should maybe work on to increase their chances of getting into the STP? Because I actually have someone that applied to clinical engineering and they weren't successful this year, and they've been asking what can they do to improve their chances and what skills can they develop. So I'm like, okay, I'm speaking with Ella today. I'm gonna ask her. So yeah.
I think mainly my sort of communication skills have been really helpful. Just going into a department that you don't know anyone and you're there for a week and you've got to learn as much as you can. Everyone that I've been and shadowed really has enjoyed teaching and explaining things. But that can be very hard to do if you're sat there not asking any questions or not seeming very interested. Doing the STP, you need to do it because you like learning and you like knowing, just learning as much as you can. So making sure that you're asking questions and you're being engaged when you're on these rotations, really, really useful. And just being able to talk to people. Sometimes you're going into meetings with sometimes senior people, and just being able to have a conversation with them, even though it can be very daunting. It's good to do. It's good to make connections, and also you're getting your name out there. So I suppose in the interview, just coming across very open, very friendly, ask any questions if you have them about the STP, if that helps.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, okay, for people that will be getting into the STP next September, what advice would you give to persons like that getting into the STP?
I would say to start off with, the university section can be a lot in one go. The university was basically like a full-time job, lectures 9 to 5 some days. With lunch, obviously. But again, really make the most of your time while you're there. You're being taught by some very, very intelligent people, a lot of them who work in the NHS. We had a consultant cardiologist paediatrician. I said that very wrong, but she was incredible, very inspiring. So again, ask as many questions as you can while you're there. Or you're being taught by people that are the forefront of their field. Make the most of it. And definitely remain organized. I've
Yeah.
made many spreadsheets with all my deadlines and like for my write-ups, training activities, got a huge one for that, to keep on track of whether I've submitted them, when I submitted them, to maybe give the assessor a bit of a poke to please sign them off or read them.
Yeah.
Yeah, remaining organized is a
So,
big thing because it's a lot of work over the 3 years that you've got to keep track of.
okay. So it seems like you guys go for your uni blocks at once. So you go to London and you are there for a month or so.
So you were there for about 2 months at the start of it, and then I don't go back until next February. So you have quite a long break between now and your next block. But I'm in contact with all the other clinical engineering trainees from my
STP.
year on a WhatsApp chat. So I also
Yeah.
recommend doing that because I'm the only clinical engineering trainee here at Nottingham, and that I know of in the East Midlands trainee network. It's nice to be able to keep in contact with them as well to see
Yeah.
how their training's going. If you need help, you can ask them.
I think I understand what it means being the only trainee in a particular trust, because most people they're either 2 or 3 persons, so kind of like do things together. But here I'm also the only one, but luckily I have Jody in third year, so it kind of I have someone to run to. Oh my god, Jody, what do I do? And she's so helpful. Oh my god, Jody is incredible. But it's not about Jody right now, but you keep saying you speak up, you ask for help, and everyone, I can attest to that everyone has always been happy to teach, happy to help. You
Yeah.
just need to ask, and everyone will you're just like always ready to help. And it's one thing that has helped me on the STP. You just need to ask, and there's always someone out there to help you. And so it's a very good advice that anyone coming into the STP should improve their communication skill and be ready to like speak up whenever they need help. Then for the 2 months you were out for uni, do you usually travel? Because I was in Manchester. I had my first uni block for 3 weeks, and I was just there during the week, and I traveled for the weekend. So for you, did you stay throughout the 2 months, or were you also traveling in between to see your family?
I'm originally from Norwich, which is like a 2.5 hour train trip. So I just wasn't going to be able to get the train every day to go to university when it was so full on. And as you can imagine, London's quite expensive. So if you're a clinical engineering STP about to start your first year, I understand the pain of trying to find accommodation.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I found a couple of other clinical engineering first year STPs, and we were able to get an Airbnb together, which made it a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
It can be quite stressful before you're about to start, but again, ask your training officer for help. You should have access to the training expenses fund, things like
Yeah.
that.
The funds. Yeah.
It can be a bit hard to get access to, but we'll get there, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's hard to get access to, but it's there for you anyway. But yeah, for the funds as well, my training officer has been really helpful. He's always there. I just ask, and he
Yeah.
finds a way around it. So yeah, wow, it's
Yeah.
been very interesting hearing from someone from a very different specialty. And cancer genomics will do DNA, genetics, lab stuff. So I think it's part of the reason why I enjoy doing this. Hearing what other STPs doing their specialty really fascinates me. So yeah, at least I have knowledge of clinical engineering now. And it's been awesome speaking to you. Thank you
Well,
so
thank you.
much,
Great
Ella.
speaking to you
And
too.
thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, so that will be it for